So can you see everything okay?
Looks great.
All right, so we're going to do part 2. So again, this is go back to the beginning. So beginner's guide to identification, families of Michigan. So part 2 is dicots. So we'll just jump straight in. I got a little window here. I don't like. Just give me a second. Well, I'm fine. All right, so the old name is Aceraceae. It's been updated. I like this Aceraceae because most of your families are a genus with an Acae at the end. And really, most of the Aceraceae, or most of this family are maples. So they've got woody trees, opposite leaves, and then the winged paired seeds. Makes them really simple. There's really only one species here, the silver maple, that's obligate wetland plant. So reminder, I'm showing you the Michigan flora, and this has got the species, common name, the family. It's gonna go over a little bit, and then how common it is. So a 0 is super common, and a 10 is like pristine environment. Then the wetland indicator status, and then what it is, tree, shrub, etc. And occasionally there'll be a status. So I'm showing you these for each of the families. And then just to point out, there's only the one obligate wetland plant, silver maple, but there are lots of other members of the family, and they're mostly maples. Okay. These few other things are pretty recent additions. So just to stick with the maples, I'm sure most of you are pretty familiar with maple. So what makes a maple a maple? Well, it's generally the palmately lobed, right? So it's got lobes that are kind of come out like palm, and then they're kind of irregular serration, and they're opposite leaves. And then they've also got the winged paired seeds / fruit, samoras. And then the three that are the most common in wetlands is our true kind of facultative wetland plant, the silver maple here, which is super deeply lobed. I commonly will also find red maple, which has got the serrate. So that's the kind of the defining characteristic. And then the box elder, or Acer nugundo, which looks like poison ivy. However, it doesn't really look like poison ivy because poison ivy has got leaves of, or they're alternate leaves, whereas these are opposite leaves. And it can have way more leaflets, but the most common would be to have 3. So that's Aceraceae. Anacardiaceae, we're basically just going in alphabetical order here, not in importance. So this one, again, woody plants, so shrubs or vines, trifoliate or pinnate, and these ones have a single seeded red or white fruit. And the one that's the most important, well, here I'll show you, oops. So there's only, again, one wetland plant. So you might be asking, well, why do this family? Because I've only picked a handful of families. Well, it's because you really should know this one, because it's your poisonous stuff. It's not poisonous in terms of eating it, but getting an allergic reaction. So poison sumac, it also includes your poison ivies. Okay, so important to know because of that. Anacardiaceae is your poison sumac, poison ivy. It's also pistachios. Some people get, and mangoes, you'll get kind of, some people get like itchy lips and stuff from those. And again, that's an allergic reaction. So the two that are super common in wet areas, technically poison ivy is not a wetland plant, but it's just plain everywhere. So, so I guarantee every wet area you go to on the way to getting to it, if it's disturbed, which most of them are, lots of foot traffic, there's probably poison ivy. And these ones are easy. Irregularly serrate, so it looks very much like a maple. Trifoliate, so 1, 2, 3 leaflets. You can't really see in this picture, but they'd be alternate. Another thing that people say is hairy rope, don't be a dope. So you got these little hairs coming off that, the vine here. Virginia creeper also does that, but if you don't have leaves, it's in the winter and you see these kind of hairy coming off the vines, don't touch it. You can catch the poison ivy during the winter. And then what makes them really easy is these berries. And these berries look about the same for the poison ivy and the poison sumac. So the poison sumac here is got bigger leaves. They're these oddly pinnate. Another thing about poison sumac is just plain where it is. I basically see these in bogs, super common in bogs in Michigan. The other thing about them, in the fall, they've got really, really gorgeous coloration. I teach a plant course in the fall, so they really stick out then. But again, good one to know because of the allergic reaction. Poison sumac generally is much worse reaction for most people. Your allergic reaction can change over time too. My wife used to weed her aunt's poison ivy out of her front lawn or whatever when she was a little girl. And then when she was pregnant with her first son, she caught poison ivy and has been, quite allergic since then. So, so you want to be kind of careful of it. Even if you think you're not allergic to it, it could change. And the famous story is the director for the Michigan State Herbarium used to study the genus, and he was not allergic. So he was super cavalier about materials, and anyone that worked in the herbarium caught poison ivy, assuming they're susceptible. All right, next one, Apiaceae. Apiaceae is an easy one. I give it the thumbs up. So this one's a really easy characteristic. It's got the compound umbels, or I just should say double umbel. So there's an umbel here, and then each one of these umbels makes up an umbel. So there's an umbel of umbels. If you see an umbel of umbels, it's Apiaceae, period. It's like Araceae. Apiaceae, Araceae, in my mind, are like two of the easiest families. Araceae, remember, is the spathe and spadex. Apiaceae is just a double umbel. They can be really hard to key out to species, but to know the family is super easy. I got to call them crossbones because most of these are poisonous. The most poisonous plants in North America are part of this family. A neat thing about them, or interesting thing, is many of them, it's the sap, and that's the poison. And many of them make you photosensitive. So, so you get a little bit of the sap on your hands because you've been weeding them. You should always wear gloves when you're weeding. And so you're weeding them, you get some sap on you because you weren't as careful as you should have been. And then if you're doing this during the day, which most people are, then you get a wicked sunburn that's much more than a sunburn because it removes your body's normal ability to kind of do DNA repair. So it's not, so if you did it in the middle of the night, it wouldn't have any reaction, but so it's the combination of you get the sap on you and you're during the day, particularly if it's sunny, you get a really, really, really nasty burn for some of these. So in general, Apiaceae, you want to be a little bit careful with. There's a number of obligate and facultative wetland plants. So it's a good one to know because of that, but there's a ton of non-wetland species as well. Okay. So I've just got some characteristics again for the family. So it's a little bit of a repeat with some better pictures. So really, I should say double umbel, right? So it's an umbel of umbels. They're often good smelly herbs. They generally have a hollow stem, but again, he shouldn't have, he should be wearing gloves, or whoever this person is holding it should be wearing gloves, because that sap is oftentimes problematic. They oftentimes have a sheath. Usually you think of sheaths as monocots, but so there's this weird sheath-like thing associated with where the petiole attaches. So those are associated with the leaf. So that's kind of unusual. So I'm just showing the poison sumac because it's the most toxic plant in North America. And I think my students are always want to know what's the most poisonous plant in North America. This is it. So it's a good one to tell people when you see it. And it's really easy because the leaves are, so this is oddly pinnate, but then it's oddly pinnate again. So it's doubly oddly pinnate. So it's a double umbel and a double oddly pinnate. Makes it pretty easy. This is one species. This is another species. And you see the bulbifera is super like thin leaves. For whatever reason, I personally see this one much more commonly, just the places I go to. I've seen both of them a decent amount, but for whatever reason, near Grand Valley, I see this one all the time. And a neat thing is it's got little seed-likes, but they're not seeds, they're bulbules. Bulbule is when you've got, it's a vegetative reproduction. So it's a little plant. So it's kind of like a fertilized seed, but it's not a fertilized seed. It's a bulbule. So it's like a little plant that then makes an asexual reproduction. You'll also see this umbel of umbels is pretty small for this species, as opposed to this one's got a much prettier inflorescence. But they're both poison sumac, and they're both quite poisonous. Apiaceae also happens to be the parsley family. So there's a lot of herbs that we eat. Kind of a herb is kind of a generic term for, smelly leafy parts that we eat. And usually we think of eating them in small doses. So the two big herb families are Apiaceae and Lamiaceae, the mint. We'll do those in a minute. But so carrots are this, parsley, and lots of others. And the neat thing is we oftentimes eat the seeds as well, or the fruits, I should say. So fennel, cumin, both of those we eat the leafy part and then the schizocarp. So that's these paired seeds, fruit/seeds. So it's kind of funny that one of the most poisonous plants is actually our food plant. So if someone's collecting wild parsley, be careful, because they're notoriously difficult to be certain of the species without flowers and fruit and like a good knowledge. Asteraceae. Asteraceae is another super easy family to know the family, but not so easy to know the species. So we're just doing family today, so it's easy. but to take it to species can be a lot more difficult. So a lot of people just think of dandelions and stuff. And so they've got compound flowers. So what do we mean by compound flowers? Well, this is not one flower. This is like 100 flowers. And each one of these little dots here is this flower. So you can see the pistil and the stamen and the petals. Those are remnants of sepals. And in this case, we've got one big petal. So this would be a ray flower and a disc flower. So it's a composite of lots of different flowers. So the old name compositae because of this. And then, so each one of the little seeds for like your dandelion head was one flower. So I've got better pictures, but here's just a quick list of species. This is tiny, you can't even see it because there's a lot of species. So there's 54 wetland species, Asteraceae. They're all over the place from common to, rare. And then there's a ton, 300 plus species altogether. So it's a super common family, really important one to know. Can be difficult to take to species. Super easy to know family, harder to take to species. So here's just some terms that you need to be using if you are taking these to species. So you talk about the head, where all the flowers are coming from, or sometimes the more fancy term is capitulum, okay? In this case, there's two flower types. We'll go over those flower types in a second. There's also, like a normal person would say, oh, there's petals and sepals. No, because each one of these is a flower, so each one of these has a sepal. So these aren't sepals. This is technically a big petal. It's just one of the petals to one of those little guys here. So these aren't sepals, they're an invoker or filaries is commonly used. Okay. So here is one flower. We've got our corolla. Remember, corolla is kind of the generic term for when all the petals are fused together. And then our calyx, again, technically just refers to all the sepals, but usually when they're fused in some way. And in a lot of cases, the calyx is reduced to a pappus. Pappus would be like hair-like, feathery-like, awns, bristles, or they could just be gone altogether. And that's the stuff you blow, when you blow your dandelion. This is one flower. So an Asteraceae has three different choices, if you will, for a flower. Most people just think of disc and ray flowers, but there's also ligulate flowers. And ligulate are super common. Dandelions are actually, they don't have disc and ray flowers. They have a bunch of ligulate flowers. So it's all the same flower type throughout the plant. And if you look, there's actually 5 fused petals, and there's a slit that the pistil and stamen come out of. Kind of neat. You can actually see all this if you just need a good hand lens. And that's another reason why Asteraceae can be a pain. This is so small that sometimes you really need a hand lens to or a good dissecting scope to take them to species. Oftentimes you'll need different stages as well. So like fruit and flower. So here's just, again, some pretty pictures. So the fruit here is an achene. An achene is a sunflower seed. Sunflower, Asteraceae, compositae. And again, a sunflower seed, you can break open the shell. So the shell is actually the ovary, the fruit, and then on the inside is the actual seed. So you could technically break those open, because I'm pretty sure the whole family is all achenes. Remember, our Cyperaceae were also achenes. And in this case, they've got these, the pathos, the stuff that catches the wind, which was all sepals. And I just got a couple pictures. So our spotted knapweed, and it's spotted. You got the little spots here. And this is invasive. A lot of you probably helped eradicate here or there. It's just fun. This is your wild lettuce. So if you let your lettuce go too long, it'll start doing this. And artichokes are so fun because it's one of the only, well, it's not the only flower you eat, but it's a flower that you eat. So it's kind of fun. If you let your artichoke, it'll never do this in your fridge, but if you kept it on the stem and didn't harvest it, it actually is a really pretty flower. All right. Betulaceae. So Betulaceae is, it's not easy if you do all of them, but if we just kind of pretend this doesn't exist, they're pretty easy. We've got the catkins, little, the female ones look like little cones. The males are these droopy catkins. Makes them pretty easy because there aren't that many woody plants that do that. So for our obligate wetland, again, there's only 4. So I'll go over the 2 genera in just a second, but there's more that are non-wetland. Okay, but these are the ones that you'll commonly see. So I've just got some pictures of some birch here, and the birch, so here's your catkins. And most of you guys would probably know your white paper birch, really easy because of the bark. These are some shrubs. Betula pumila is a little cute shrub that's in peatlands. I actually see pretty regularly. But ulmus, is like super common. If you are in a wetland, it's the most common shrub in northern wetlands. So north of Grand Rapids, like Grand Rapids is kind of the border. Like south of Grand Rapids, the dominant shrubs in wetlands are going to be willows and dogwoods and buttonbush. North of Grand Rapids, maybe 30 miles north, depending on where you go and stuff. It tends to be less of the willows and buttonbush and dogwoods, and it becomes almost exclusively the ulmus. And this one's easy because of the little cones, the male and the female, and then it's also doubly serried. Okay, so it's a good one to know because of that. The Borangiaceae, or Borge family. These ones are just cute because they're hairy. Makes them kind of weird. And then they've got the fused petals. So there's like 5 distinct lobes to it, 5 petals that are fused, and almost always, and they're fuzzy. So there aren't that many fuzzy-leaved plants. So it's probably this family if it's fuzzy. And there's only a couple. There's the just a few of them that are wetland, but the forget-me-nots are just so cute. So, and then there's a bunch of other non-wetland plants within this family. So again, I mentioned this for the first part, but wetlands are really nice because it's an easier flora to learn because there are generally fewer species within each family that occur within a wetland. So it's just a much smaller pool of species. So if you master your wetland plants, then it translates really well to upland. But it's just a smaller list to like learn and get comfortable with and feel good about. You go to a place, you can identify stuff. Then once you start to master those, then you start to look for those same characteristics in uplands. Upland tends to be much more diverse. I mean, not tends to be, it's much more diverse. So I've just got two pictures for two representatives of the family. The hoary puccoon is not a wetland plant, it's a dunes plant. We see it at the dunes all around here. But it's got the fuzzy leaves and the fused petals. But forget-me-nots, you can't really see the leaves very well in this, but what is cool is you can see the hairs on the leaves in this picture really well. And those are just such pretty flowers, right? You can't forget a forget-me-not, right? Blue flowers with the little yellow eye. But it's the fused petals, 5 fused petals and the hairy leaves that you're really looking for the family. Brassicaceae. Brassicaceae is a huge family, and they tend to be a lot of weeds. And they're really easy to know the family, harder to know the species. So again, here's my little thing. When you're keying them out, you actually, this is a weird one. Usually, if you're keying out a plant, you need to if it's a flowering plant, you need a flower. If it's a fern, you need spores, right? If it's a gymnosperm, you need cones, right? So sometimes with flowering plants, though, instead of flowers, you actually need fruit. So in this case, for Brassicaceae, you really need the fruit. Sedges, Cyperaceae, you really need the fruit to key them out. The flowers look pretty similar. The Brassicaceae, all the flowers look about the same, so you really need the fruit. And the fruit, so here's just a bunch of little pictures, thumbnails of different shapes of the fruit. And the fruit is really unique because it's kind of like a pod, like green beans and stuff, but it's not, because that's another family. So it's this papery thing in the middle that the seeds sit on, and then it's got the 2 pod parts. So it'd be like if I had a piece of paper that had the seeds on that, and then the pod part over that. So it's that little papery thing is where the seeds are. That's just unusual, but that's the fruit. The flowers are really easy. They look like an X. There's always 4 petals. And then if you look, there's going to be 4 big stamen and 2 little ones. So this shows really nicely the 2 smaller stamen and the 4 bigger ones. Okay. There aren't that many species in wetlands. I mean, it's bigger list than I'd like to give to introductory level plant course, but it's way better than the 87 non-wetland species. So again, look for them in the wetlands, get comfortable with it, then apply that knowledge outside of wetlands. So here's some just characteristics for the family. The cross, the old name was the crucifers, then based off the X or the cross. A lot of botanists were monks and stuff, so the crucifix. Then we've got your 4 taller stamen, 2 shorter. It's kind of hard to tell in this picture that they're taller and shorter, but if you're looking from the side, you'd see that really easily. And then you've got silicule or silique. I usually just use silique, but technically a silicule would be a short, fat one, whereas a silique is long and skinny. There's a lot of in-betweens. Okay. The family that, or the plant that's that we eat is your broccoli, right? And all the broccoli derivatives, if you will. So remember cabbage and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts and kale. They're all the same species. You're just bred for different parts of them. So it's an important one for consumption, and it does really well in northern climates. It can your broccoli can withstand cold, so you can grow Brussels sprouts later in the summer, and then you can harvest them all winter, right? And if you don't harvest them, Brussels sprouts it's the apical bud, the bud at the tip, and it'll just start growing in the spring. And for that matter, if you have kale, which we just bred just for the leaves, and if you leave it over winter, well, next year it's going to look kind of broccoli-like and produce a lot of flowers. All right. Our honeysuckle here, the Caprophiliaceae, I'm not going to say it right, Caprophiliaceae. It's been split, so but the characteristic fits for both the families, so I'm keeping them lumped. So they've got opposite leaves, and then but the real thing is these paired flowers. So you can see these little pairs here. The two flowers off of one little stalk. You see two flowers off of one little stalk. In this case, it's three, but at least two flowers off of one little stalk. Then it's probably this family. So here's again your members in wetlands. So I'll show you a picture of each of these in just a second. But then there's a bunch of non-wetlands. So there's almost 20 in the Caprophiliaceae, and then 10 for the Adoxaceae. So total almost 30 species. So here's the three that you'll find in the wetlands. So honeysuckles in general, and honeysuckles are super common, and they're in flower right now. In flower in May, and they're kind of a weed that's everywhere, a small shrub that's kind of pretty, so people leave them, but it shows really nicely those two buds together. And you'll see then later in the season 2 berries from the same little stalk. So that shows the family really well. Viburnums. So this is the high bush cranberry. So this would have really pretty red berries later, but this is kind of the idyllic flower, because they tend to open on the outside first. But if you look, there's the branched branch. This makes a corm inflorescence. So, and then there's lots of these little pairs. And again, each one of these is these paired. So there's a lot of little berries coming off the corm. So this is your simplest with just 2, and then in this case the 2s are then lumped together, which also makes a corm inflorescence. So elderberries, a lot of people collect elderberries and eat them. They're pretty tart, so you don't usually eat them just by themselves, but if you add a lot of sugar, you can make a great jam. And then elderberries, sambucus, would be your sambucol, which you'd use to fight the flu. It's clinically proven to be pretty much the same efficacy as Tamiflu. So my wife and I actually, we don't do a lot of medicinal stuff, but that's one that she would historically grab a bunch of elderberries and freeze them, and then she'd boil them in the flu season. But those paired flowers / berries. Cornaceae. So these are your dogwoods, cornus. Again, woody, so small trees or shrubs. They're generally opposite of world. There's a couple alternate, so that's not an always. They've got the fleshy fruit. Sometimes they've got the showy bracts. This is, like your flowering dogwood. Those are the ones that show up really easily. But the easy thing with them, like to me at least, it's super easy, is these veins hug the leaf margin. And that's just unusual. Typically veins kind of, a typical leaf would, you've got a mid vein, then you just kind of go out. Whereas these ones go out and they kind of hug the margin quite a bit. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but that's an unusual pattern. there's only 2 species that are in wetlands, but those ones are like all over. So again, dogwoods, cornus are one of the most common shrubs in southern wetlands. And then adjacent to your wetland, there'll be a bunch of other dogwoods as well. Because most of the hydrology around southern Michigan, we've done so much to stabilize the water depth. So you've kind of got wet area right next to not wet area. And so there'll be some dogwoods in the wet area, but there'll even be more in the not wet area right next to it. They do quite well in there. So again, here's those veins that kind of hug. They look they're almost monocot-like, but they're not monocot because we've got a strong mid-vein. Right? And then the really easy thing is if you break one of these, there's a little stringy in veins. There's some other stuff that does the stringy veins, plantains and stuff. But dogwoods do this. And if you break it just right, you can actually hold it so that it stays connected, holding on by the stringiness. So that's an easy double check. Next is Ericaceae. Now, Ericaceae is just a bunch of oftens, which is annoying. So there isn't like good characteristics. So, part of me would like to not list it in my list for my course because I can't give like good characteristics because they're mostly usuallys. That being said, though, it's a super important family because there's a lot of species. Oftentimes to key them out, you really need the berries. Okay, so when you're keying these out, look for the berries. If you get the berries, it's really easy for a lot of these. So here's your list. These are all, almost all associated with peatlands, acidic soils. Okay, there's another 25 species that are non-wetland, but the ones in wetlands are very much, well, the family in general likes acidic soil. Rhododendrons in general, azaleas, rhododendrons, of this family. So here's some of those characteristics again. So there's 4 to 5 fused petals. So they could be these little lantern-like, and that's like the classic Ericaceae. There's some other plants in the world that do that, but if you're in Michigan and you've got these lantern-like, I automatically think Ericaceae. More in general, they're going to be fused petals. So here, these are all fused. This is your laurel, like mountain laurels, commonly planted, particularly those salvia here. They don't do super well around here. But then also these leathery, oftentimes evergreen leaves. So this is leatherleaf. So leatherleaf is a super common Ericaceae in bogs around here. You can find it in peatlands in general, but it's super common in bogs. This family is super common in bogs. So again, I go by the environment for Ericaceae. Next one, Fabaceae. So you could say the Fabaceae is fabulous, right? What makes them so fabulous? Well, they don't all do this, but the really easy ones have this banner, so 2 petals here that just stick up and they're like showy, so they're a banner. Then there's 2 that are like wings, okay? And then there's 1 that wraps all the way around the pistil, and that's the keel. So if you see banner, wings, and keel, it's Fabaceae. there's sister family or a very, very close related family. So that's an easy one. They've also all the pods. So they've got these pea pods, or legumes, because these are the legume family. So like green beans. So they open on, there's a seam and they open and there's the beans inside. So beans in general are this family. Other easy things are they tend to be these really pinnate leaves. So that's pretty common. And then they've also have the root nodules. I'll talk more about that in just a second. So there aren't many in wetlands. There's only a handful here, right? But again, it's a super, super common family in Michigan. So know the ones in wetlands and then apply that knowledge upland. So here's just some pretty pictures. This is just to point out they don't always do the banner and keel, right? So for me, that would be, I couldn't tell that what family this is based off that picture. I would probably be able to figure it out by the pods, but these three are super easy, those banner and keel. Right. A couple other things is tendrils. So when you see the tendrils, so when you see tendrils, that's another good characteristic for Fabaceae. There's some other things that do tendrils. Think of crepes and stuff, but tendrils aren't that common. And then the fun thing is so this is the tiny bit of natural history or whatnot, the rhizobium. So they've got these root nodules in the roots. So they've got these little ball, kind of like spherical structures that are host for the bacterium rhizobium. And rhizobium's neat because, or very beneficial because it's a strong nitrogen fixer. So it does nitrogen fixation, which makes it so that you can get atmospheric nitrogen. Remember, plants are generally very low in nitrogen, low in protein, because they're low in nitrogen or proteins are very nitrogen rich. So beans are high in protein, right? So it was a little long-winded there, but and the atmosphere is like 78% nitrogen, but it's a triple bond. So it's an inert gas. It's generally not readily available, but if you've got this bacteria in you that or associated that can break that bond, then you've got an unlimited supply of nitrogen. That being said, you got to feed this bacteria. So anytime you farm out your activities, it costs you more. So it costs more to feed the rhizobium and get the nitrogen than if you just had a root and did stuff. But if there's no nitrogen in the soil, then it's beneficial to produce these root nodules. So if you see root nodules, like if you're growing beans in your garden and you see root nodules, well, you probably want to do some organic nitrogen fertilizer because you'll get faster growth if you've got ample supply. And this is why, but the idea that legumes can take nitrogen from the atmosphere. So sometimes they're called green manure. So some of your clovers and so forth, you'd plant those in your fallow field. Remember fallow fields when you don't plow that year, and then you till that up. And so during the year, they get a lot of nitrogen, and then as those break down, that's nitrogen fertilizer. Fun aside, but so Fabaceae is super important. They're a super important family for food, all your beans. All right, next one. I'm not going to say this right, Hallorangiaceae. These ones are easy. It's just they're super deeply divided or feather-like. It's mostly myriafilum. So, but if you're keying these out, you have to get the flower that's up out of the water. Generally, you need that to figure out what they are. So it's really easy to know the genus. Harder to take it to species unless you have the flower. So these are all obligate wetland plants. These are all submergents. So there's just the two general. So I've got a better picture. They've got these feather-like leaves. So it looks like a feather. If there's more than 12 leaflets on one side, it's almost certainly Myriafilum spicatum. That's the invasive Eurasian milfoil. There are a couple natives that have more than 12, and these have hybridized a little bit, so you could get some hybrids. But if you've only got a handful of leaflets on one side, then it's probably a native, or it's almost certainly a native. So these are all Myriafilums on this side. On this side is the mermaid weed, and it's not nearly as deeply lobed. And it's a really cool submergent for fish tanks. So it's commonly sold at the pet store. But I teach aquatic plants, and I have students bring in the submergents as part of one of the assignments. And maybe half the years people bring this in, and then I'll take it home and put it in my fish tank. But it's you only get these really deeply when you've got highlight. And then the redder color only comes with highlight too. But they look, similar, but it's more of a leaf. So if they're growing out of the water, it's not nearly as dissected here. And that dissected really helps with photosynthesis. Submergents are very much carbon dioxide limited. So your typical submergent kind of peters out how much photosynthesis it does underwater by 11 o'clock in the morning, because they've used up all the carbon dioxide. So after that, they're still doing photosynthesis because they're also respiring, but they're not doing much more than that because they used up the carbon dioxide, and they're carbon dioxide limited. And the reason they're carbon dioxide limited is carbon dioxide moves pretty slowly through the water. So one of the ways to keep doing photosynthesis is to have a lot of surface area. Algae aren't nearly as carbon dioxide limited. So if you have really high light, like in your fish tank, you're probably not benefiting your aquatic, your submergents that much, because they peter out pretty quick unless you do carbon dioxide injection. And you'll just get a big algal bloom. A lot of people with ponds in their yard get a lot of algae because of the high light. Myriafilum does this adaptation, lots of surface area. Sometimes they'll actually be crusty because they're doing photosynthesis so fast that they're changing the pH that you actually get marl or limestone around the leaves, which is kind of cool. Here's another Myriafilum, just to point out that they're not all this. There's always some exceptions. This is Myriafilum telenium, and it just looks like little stalks. It's actually super common, but these ones I'd expect you'd know really easily. This one is more of, you just know it because you've seen it a bunch. If you're keying these out, you need that inflorescence that sticks up out of the water. All right, next, Lamiaceae. Lamiaceae is our mints. So mints are easy because they got the square stem, opposite leaves, and then generally the flowers from the leaf axis. Okay, there's plenty of them that are terminal. Most plants are terminal inflorescence. They oftentimes smell good. And then they oftentimes have these, the petals are fused, and they'll tend to have 2 up and 3 down. but they've got two lips, like lips. So they're two lips. So you can, snapdragons we'll see later also are two lipped. I give a thumbs up because oftentimes they really do have the square stem, the opposite leaves and flowers from the leaf axis. So they're usually pretty easy to figure out. Really easy to figure out that they're mint, not as easy to figure out what species. But so these are the 24 wetland plants. There's 84 total. So there's a lot of species out there, so that can make it a little bit daunting. But then they're usually not that bad. So here's again just the easy characteristics, and these are the main genera. Okay, so they've all got the flowers from the leaf axis. This is showing that really nice, although this one is not doing the flowers from the leaf axis. But these are really showing it well. The Lycopus is really deeply serrate, makes it really easy. It's just such a distinctive looking plant. The flowers from leaf axis, opposite leaves, and then that really deeply low Lycopus. Your mints, this shows those hairs really well. Those hairs are where the oils are in. So as you break one of those hairs, you smell the mint. So that's makes, I mean, mints are easy because they smell like mint. And then these others, you can key them out. But knowing the family is relatively easy. Again, these are important. These are your herbs. So mint, oregano, basil, great examples of Lamiaceae. Lentiburulaceae. So these ones are quite easy because all there is they're carnivorous. So they've got these little bladders. So that's the little guy with the thumbs up. If you see bladders, then it's a utricularia. And they're they eat insects, or I should say just carnivorous, because they'll actually eat zooplankton, which tend to be more crustaceans. But and then they'll also have this little flower that sticks up out of the water that's also two-lipped, and kind of cute. They could grow out of the mud, but they're usually in the water. There's a number of species of utricularia. There's one other one that's not common. It's in the UP. So basically this whole family is just utricularia, or bladderworts. So here's that other one that's just unusual. So I wouldn't expect you to recognize that. But if you see these little bladders, it's this family. And better than that, it's utricularia. And again, to then be able to key it out, you'll probably need the flowers sticking up out of the water. So really easy to know the genus, harder to know the species. They're actually not that hard to figure out the species because they tend to have quite different leaf branching. They're highly dissected leaves again, and they branch in different ways. So usually you can figure them out without the flowers. But if you get the flowers, then it makes it really easy. All right, next, Litheraceae. So Lithorum. So again, this is just kind of a fire hose. So we're getting lots of families, lots of characteristics. The notes are probably better than the lecture because they're easier to just kind of look at while you're out in the field. But this one is, one of the things I look for is the two different stamen sizes. Brassicaceae also has the two different stamen sizes, but it's not a common characteristic. So if you got showy flowers, two different stamen sizes, it's not a Brassicaceae. Brassicaceae is easy because it makes the little cross. They oftentimes have opposite or world leaves, showy flowers, probably Litheraceae. The big ones, the purple lithroid, right? And this whole family is all obligate wetland plants in Michigan. So it's a good one to know. And certainly I expect that most of you know purple loosestrife. Purple loosestrife just takes over an area. However, you got to be a little careful. Decadon here is the native. So it looks quite a bit different. The purple loosestrife is all terminal inflorescence. Decadon is leaf axis as well. But again, look for those stamen. If you got two different size stamen, then it's probably the Litheraceae. Polygonaceae. Polygonum is in the family, but the family in general just has these kind of, it's hard to tell from these pictures, but they tend to be real jointed, zigzaggy. And then the seeds are pretty distinct. So I got a better picture in just a second. So it's an important one because there's lots of them. However, this is showing all, I'm not going to say this right because I never use the word, Persicariae and then Bistorta. Those two genera, you can get in arguments over people. It's polygonum. That the family is named after. That's the old genus, and they've split it depending on who you talk to. So it's Polygonum and Rumex if you use just an older book. And Polygonum's super easy because all your polygonums have this ochrea. So this ochrea is a weird structure. It's a sheath like that's above where the leaf attaches. That's unusual. First off, this is a dicot, so you shouldn't have a sheath. And you can scrape this off, but it wraps all the way around. So if you see that, then it's polygonum, which has then been split into these two different additional genera. So it's going to be one of those three genera if it's got an ochrea. That makes it easy. To know the family is really easy because of these seeds. The seeds are really distinctive looking. I don't know if you guys are Star Wars fans, but this was from the Star Wars where Darth Vader becomes Darth Vader, or better yet, go back in time to Battlestar Galactica. So you've got these kind of triangular seeds that look like little spaceships. You see that? It's probably Polygonaceae. There's a couple other things elsewhere in the world that look similar, but I don't think there's anything else in Michigan that does. And certainly if you got zigzaggy stems and then this Polygonaceae. All right, next. Ranunculaceae. So Ranunculaceae is, in my mind, easy because all these little pistils / carpels, remember carpel would be the little sections inside a pistil. In this case, there's just one section. So the pistil and carpel kind of used interchangeably. So lots of unfused carpels, and they look kind of like a pineapple to me. So 5 to many carpels. That's kind of the characteristics that I kind of go with. And that's not like the greatest characteristic in the world, but these tend to just look pretty distinct once you get an eye for it. Okay. So there's a lot of species. It's a big family. It's an important family. There's but the two biggies that we'll do are the buttercups, and I'll show you another one in a second. But buttercups are really common, and again, it's at the end of its flowering, and so it stopped flowering. There's still some petals left on there, but the pistils are all enlarging, and they get that little pineapple-like thing. So the three that are pretty common in wetlands, Caltha palustris. Look at those carpels, right? You can see the carpels. The buttercup, you can really see the carpels. It's harder to see in the anemone just because it's smaller, but there's lots of little carpels. And then there's tons of stamen, lots and lots of stamen. And then there's 5 petals that are quite pretty, right? 5 petals, quite pretty. That makes them good ranunculaceae. Caltha palustris is finishing flowering now. It's an early spring one. Buttercups are well, all 3 of these ones are early flower. Many of your ranunculaceae are early flowers. Columbine, as I think about it, they're almost all early flower. Caltha palustris is really easy because of they've almost looks like violet, these kind of heart-shaped leaves. The one buttercup, most of your buttercups aren't going to be in the water. This one has really dissected leaves that look almost like a myrophilum, but it's a very different branching pattern. They come out in kind of 3s. So that makes them easy. So ranunculaceae. Rose family. Rose family is huge. There's a lot of characteristics that kind of fit into rose, but none that always work. So it just makes it annoying. So we'll do some subfamilies of it, but there's a couple characteristics that usually work for most of them. Okay, 5 petals, 5 sepals. Okay, numerous stamen. That would have worked for, well, it wouldn't have worked for ranunculaceae because ranunculaceae don't always have the sepals. Serrate leaves, lots of things have serrate leaves, but roses almost always do. But the stipules. So with each leaf here, this isn't the greatest picture, but there's a leaf and there's this weird thing coming off the leaf. This one doesn't have them. But roses really have these weird things coming off the leaves. Those are stipules. You see stipules, there aren't many things with stipules. Legumes oftentimes do, roses too. There's a lot of species, like 163 species, and 20 of those occur in wetlands. So they're quite common. So you need to know, I mean, so it's a really important family to know. So some other things to look for. So here's those lots of stamen, but you don't have those real distinct carpels like we just saw with ranunculaceae. But there's a hypanthium. So what's a hypanthium? What happens with a rose family? There's like this little ball or bowl that the pistil sits in. Okay, so the pistil would be in the middle here, and there's this little bowl that it's within. So the sepals, not sepals, the pedicel, the stalk is kind of enlarged into a bowl, and that's a hypanthium. Okay. And they can be super distinctive. So in the case of strawberries, which are super common, the hypanthium is flattened out, but it's still kind of the base of this is much thicker and kind of fused. But your typical rose has got this really strong hypanthium. And so there's this bowl that all the parts are coming from. Hypanthium. So if you see hypanthium, it's probably a rose family. So there's these couple subfamilies. So the prunoids, so your peaches, cherries, the drupe, anytime you've got the stone fruits, nectarines, avocados, they're a drupe. I shouldn't have said avocados. I don't remember if that is. It's a drupe, I know that, but I'm not sure it's this family. but so when you look at you break that open and the seeds inside, right? That's the one subfamily. The Spiroideae, these have huge stamen. So they're serrate leaves. These flowers are they're pretty, but they've got these stamen that are like twice the size of the petals. So if you see really long stamen, lots and lots of stamen that are really long, probably Spirea. Then there's the pomes. The pomes are just the pears and apples. And those have a really distinct, and those are just finishing flowering. So all your crab apples and stuff are kind of finishing in May, or towards the end of May. So they're, and this has been a pretty warm spring, so they're mostly finishing. Right now, many of the trees that are just finishing flowering were the Rosaceae, and you can really see the hypanthium. And so when you eat an apple, it's actually all stem. So the ovary and the fruit part is all the core and inside, and this is all stem. That's all your hypanthium. All right, so that was your roses. Now we're keep going. Salicaceae. Salicaceae is mostly just salix or willows. Okay, so they're woody again. They've got catkins. So also see betula, right? Betula also have catkins. But they tend to be long, skinny leaves. There's lots of species. Like there's a lot of salix. And salix, remember, is one of the dominant shrubs in wetlands. Okay. So salix, so they've got these little catkins. So this is your populus. So these are kind of catkin, they're not as distinct. Populus deltoides is common in wetlands. It's really unique because it's got these leaf margin that looks like a cresting wave. It's just unusual. They're triangular-ish leaves or deltoid, hence the name. But willows, super common. They tend to have these little tiny serrations on the leaves, and they're real long, skinny, and then they've got the catkins. So willows, super common, super easy to know willow or salix, harder to take it to species. Willows all have essentially aspirin in their bark. And it's pretty much every indigenous population has an herbal remedy that involves a salix because salix are pretty global distribution, and every species has the aspirin in them. So anything that aspirin helps with, headaches, anti-inflammatory, etc. Salix, you can just chew on some. You don't really want to eat bark because that tastes nasty. So you just grab a young twig and pull the leaves off and kind of chew on that. All right, Scrophulariaceae. Scrophulariaceae has been split into a bunch of different families. So that's annoying because the characteristic is pretty good for it. And they've got the snapdragon here, which has got the two mouths. So it's two-lipped, and in this case, they tend to be a little more showy because the top tends to be, so tends to be 3 petals on the top and 2 on the bottom. So 3 on the top and 2 on the bottom. So it's the opposite of the mints, but you could easily confuse the flower with a mint flower. But remember, mints would then have square stems, opposite leaves, that stuff. Whereas Graphilariaceae doesn't. Okay, there's a lot of species. So this is showing all the wetland ones, okay? And then in total, there's a bunch more. These are your kind of the total for upland. So, well, I didn't total them there, but almost 100 species. And they're pretty important in wetlands. But unfortunately, it's these multiple families, and I never remember the families because I just was taught, Scrophulariaceae, and hard to teach an old dog new tricks. So I just got Scrophulariaceae and then looked to see what the other families were broken into. Another characteristic for the family is they've got lots of little seeds. So they've got capsules with lots of seeds. Okay. And then I've just got a couple of fun pictures. So the Pedicularis is pretty common around here. It's also a fun Arctic plant that, with the 3 fused petals on top and 2 on bottom, quite showy, quite pretty. Foxglove is the old family anyhow. And so they're these fused petals. They're not the 2 lipped in the same sense. But it is the member of the family. They don't all have the 2-lipped, so good member of the family. This one's easier to know just by the leaves, the fuzzy leaves. Indian paintbrush is kind of a famous one. So again, it's a big family, quite diverse, and it's been split into multiple families now. All right, we're getting close to the end here. Solanaceae. I just cut to the chase. There's none in wetlands, which is really annoying, but I'll go back to this. It's one that you should know, though, because they're so distinct, and they are pretty common in non-wetlands. The petals, see how that kind of shows it curved back? So hopefully you guys are doing a garden and you're planting tomatoes sometime. Look at the tomato flowers. They're all mutated now because we've selected for weird stuff. They should have had 5 petals. Most of the tomatoes I plant now have weird number of petals, but they do curve back, and that reflexed is a good characteristic for Solanaceae. See how these are curved back. So if you see these fused petals curved back, they're reflexed. That's good characteristic for Solanaceae. There's 26 non-wetland plants. None are true wetland plants. But petunias are kind of a common flower box plant. They're these fused petals and they curve back. They curve back, which is unusual. But it's such an important family because of the foods. By far the most important family was Poaceae, which we did on Monday. But you could get in arguments whether what's number 2. If you're a bean person, you'd say Fabaceae. If you're a potato person, you would say Solanaceae. I'm not objective because my wife studied potatoes, so I would say potatoes is second most important, but getting arguments. The fun thing though is all the foods that we eat from Solanaceae are from the New World. So anytime you see like historical fiction or whatever, and like if you see someone from Asian descent eating hot peppers, pre-1600s, it was wrong because these all came from South America. If you go to Italy, you know, if you showed some Romans eating Roman times, BC, with tomatoes, because they came from South America. And potatoes, we think of like Ireland. No, those all came from Peru. So that was later. Kind of fun. It's a super poisonous family. So again, a fun example like Apiaceae, where our edible plants are from a family that's quite poisonous. And we're almost done. Urticaceae. Urticaceae is fun. It's your nettles. So let me just oftentimes they've got these 3 veins. It would be better with a picture. There's 4 really common wetland ones, and then there's a handful of non-wetland ones. I'm going to point out the stinging nettle because it's so important. It's so common. So here's the 4 that I teach in my course. So these are good ones to know, again, because you get stung by them. So you don't want to get stung. So you want to know them. Urticaceae in general, the family is really easy. But if you look at the leaf margin, it looks like these little triangles, right? So that's just, oops, that's just, that's pretty unique, those little triangles. So you see the triangle, probably urticaceae. Then look, see these 3 veins? It's harder to see in this one. Here, okay, you see those 3 kind of main veins, harder to see in this, but they're kind of there. So there's 3 veins, that leaf margin. I'm thinking urticaceae. Then if I'm unsure, you can rub it against like right here, like your cheek, real susceptible skin, see if it burns like hell. If it does, it was urticaceae. Don't do that. So we've got our 2 stinging ones. The Urtica dioica, it's got drooping balls. Okay, so and then the false nettle has got erect balls. So there's these little spears, and they stick up. They kind of look like if you gave your 10-year-old the ice cream scoop and left the room. They just keep piling on scooping ice cream. So they're started out as balls, but they kind of merge together. Whereas here they droop. And so that's a good characteristic, the inflorescence, to separate these. So these 2 are stinging. These 2 are non-stinging. So Bohemia and Pila are non-stinging. Urtica laportea are stinging. And then we've got the ball, like a string of balls that droop. So the inflorescence ball-like and drooping versus upright. Make the distinction here. And then the 2 bottom ones, we've got branched inflorescence. So the inflorescence is a branched. And so inflow branched for both of these. And then the Pila, they're mostly not terminal. They can have some at the tip, but they tend to be just from leaf axis. Whereas Laportea, and these really will sting you hard, they're from the tip. And then it's stinging. Okay, so that was kind of our families, our fire gun, or fire hose. Real quick of a bunch of families for the dicots. Lots of info, lot to take in, but hopefully you'll recognize a couple of these. Again, I try to do the easy ones and the ones that are fairly common in Michigan wetlands. So I'm happy to take questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Hollister. We appreciate all this information you're sharing with us today. To the viewers out there, if you have any questions, please type your questions in the Q&A function located at the bottom of your screen, and I will read them for Dr. Hollister's response. If you have no questions, you're free to go. We appreciate you taking the time out of your day to tune into this webinar. We'll just stick around for a couple minutes here to see if any questions pour in.
Remember, these lectures have the associated PDFs of all the slides. So again, those are probably more helpful to kind of take around with you and look at. And then there's also a Word document that is a list of common plants that I've put together that have some really quick characteristics for the families as well.
Okay, so I have not received any questions yet. I believe it's similar to this past Monday where there's so much information to digest. We all just need to sit down with it and really absorb it before we can generate good questions. So with that, I think we will end the webinar. And again, Dr. Hollister, thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone. Bye.